there as frustration builds over the government's response. ITV Europe editor James Mates has this report.
Deep under a shopping centre in the suburbs of Valencia, the water is as deep as ever. This car park still barely accessible to rescue workers. In some places, only a canoe is good enough. It's in places like these that they fear many more victims are still to be found. Being caught in your car when the floods hit was often fatal. Finally now, but much too late, the full resources of the Spanish state are being deployed in the city. The anger here is that it took 5 days for the army and its heavy equipment to be on their streets in these sort of numbers. 7,800 are now at work here. What a difference it might have made to Valencians if they'd seen them the morning after the floods. Instead, they're not just desperate at the loss of almost everything they own, they're angry too. Anger they took out on their king and queen yesterday afternoon, spattering them with clods of the mud that had invaded their homes. We have to give them hope, the king said late last night. Give them hope and guarantee to them that the state in all its power is present. Almost unbelievably, it's still raining torrentially on Spain's Mediterranean coast. Barcelona airport partially evacuated today. Roads nearby turning into minor rivers, though nothing like as dangerous as the wall of water that hit Valencia. Some of the streets of Tarragona, south of Barcelona, are also awash. Back in Valencia, the search has moved downstream, not so much for survivors as for bodies in vehicles swept miles away by the water. Nighttime infrared pictures show the moment a sniffer dog alerts its handlers to the presence of a possible victim along a riverbed. These searches could be going on for many days yet. Longer still, though, will be the anger and recrimination at both the lack of warning and lack of help. James Mates, ITV News.
In the Middle East, Israel says it has terminated a decades-old agreement that officially recognizes UNRWA, the UN agency providing aid and services to the Gaza Strip. The termination is immediate and comes a week after Israel's legislature passed 2 laws that would sever ties with the agency and stop its operations there. Israel says the organization has been infiltrated by Hamas terrorists. UNRWA says it's purged any suspected Hamas from its ranks. Meantime, health officials in Gaza said today there are no emergency crews left in the north, where Israel has waged a renewed offensive for nearly a month.
There are no longer any ambulances in the northern Gaza Strip governorate to carry out the duty of transporting the injured. A large number of injured people are bleeding on the roads and in the places of various targets, and there are no civil defense or first aid crews to perform humanitarian duties and transport and provide the necessary medical assistance to them.
Separately, health officials in Lebanon say that more than 3,000 people have been killed during the last 13 months of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. The conflict began the day after the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. North Korea launched multiple short-range ballistic missiles today as it continues its weapons demonstrations before the U.S. presidential election. The missiles landed in the sea off Japan, according to the Japanese Defense Ministry. The launch came days after North Korea tested an ICBM designed to reach the U.S. mainland. Turning to India, authorities say at least 36 people were killed when an overcrowded bus plunged into a gorge earlier today. The accident happened in the remote Almora district in the mountainous north of the country. Onlookers at the base of the 200-foot ravine watched as emergency crews pulled bodies from the wreckage and attended to the survivors. At least 20 people were injured. Western leaders have welcomed the re-election of Moldova's pro-European president. Maia Sandu defeated a Russia-friendly opponent in a race that was marred by claims of Russian interference and voter fraud. In a statement, President Joe Biden congratulated Sandu on her historic re-election, saying Russia sought to undermine Moldova's democratic institutions and election processes, but failed. Sandu campaigned on a promise to push forward Moldova's candidacy for European Union membership. The country applied to join the EU shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The U.S. Supreme Court will take up a long-running dispute over redistricting in Louisiana, involving two mostly black districts. The decision marks at least the third time the justices will step into the battle over voting lines in the state. A lower court had invalidated the most recent map, saying it relies too heavily on race. But the justices allowed it to be used in this election cycle after civil rights groups appealed. The Supreme Court will hear arguments early next year, with a decision expected by summer of 2025. In Ohio, a white former police officer has been convicted of murder